Dubai, a city built on sand, gold, and secrets. Its skyline gleams with towers that pierce the desert sun, symbols of power and progress. But beneath the glass and glamour, there are stories no one dares to tell, stories of the invisible lives that keep the city shining. On a humid Friday afternoon in Al Nada, one such story reached its tragic end. A call came to Dubai police reporting a disturbance in a high-rise apartment. When officers arrived, they found the door unlocked. Inside, the air was heavy, still, and faintly metallic. On the kitchen floor lay the body of a woman, motionless, her phone still buzzing with unanswered messages beside her. She was Maria Liza Ramos, a 56-year-old Filipina housekeeper. For 12 years, she had lived in Dubai, working quietly for wealthy families, cooking, cleaning, and sending money back to her children in the Philippines. Her friends said she was responsible, gentle, and deeply religious. Liza never caused trouble, one coworker later recalled. She was the kind of woman who prayed before every meal, even when she was hungry. But the apartment where she died wasn't her employer's family home. It was a private residence, rented by her employer, Faisal Al-Mansour, a 42-year-old businessman. Police noted the details with unease. The absence of forced entry, a broken glass near the counter, faint bruises on her wrists. Within hours, word spread quietly among the Filipino community. It was her boss's apartment. As investigators began piecing together the evidence, whispers of something forbidden emerged, that Liza had been involved in a secret affair with her employer. What started as trust and familiarity may have grown into something far more dangerous in a society where relationships like theirs are taboo, even criminal. Friends recalled her recent changes, new clothes, long phone calls, sudden absences. "She told me he cared for her," one said, but she also said they had to keep it quiet. Now, Liza's silence filled the apartment. The woman who once cleaned other people's messes had become the center of a mystery that few would dare to speak about openly. As the sun set over Dubai's glittering skyline, police sealed off the scene. Neighbors watched from their balconies, whispering names and rumors. And somewhere in that silence, a single question began to echo, one that would unravel love, power, and betrayal in the weeks to come. What really happened to Liza Ramos? Before she became another name in a police report, Maria Liza Ramos was a mother, a wife, and a dreamer. Born and raised in a small town in Laguna, Philippines, she grew up surrounded by rice fields and hardship. Her father worked odd jobs, her mother sold vegetables in the market. Liza married young at 21 and had 3 children, 2 daughters and a son. Her husband, a tricycle driver, struggled to make ends meet. When debts piled up and the roof began to leak, she made the same decision millions of Filipinos have made before her. She left. In 2010, Liza boarded a flight to Dubai with a contract as a live-in housekeeper. She told her children she would only stay for 2 years. But 2 years became 12. Her earnings paid for school fees, hospital bills, and eventually her eldest daughter's wedding. Her life abroad was built on sacrifice, birthdays missed, Christmases spent alone, and the ache of being needed from afar. Those who worked with her remember her kindness. "Liza was the one who shared food when others had none," said her coworker Gemma. "She was quiet, but her heart was big." She was also known for her discipline, waking before sunrise, finishing chores without complaint, and saving every dirham she could. For her, work wasn't just duty, it was survival. When she was assigned to the household of Faisal Al-Mansour, she considered it a blessing. He was a respected businessman in his 40s, polite but distant, with a wife and 2 young children. Liza became their caretaker, preparing meals, minding the children, and keeping the home immaculate. Over time, she earned Faisal's trust. He would ask her to accompany him on errands or manage small household purchases. To outsiders, it looked like respect between employer and worker. But beneath that formality, an unspoken familiarity began to form. Faisal confided in her during difficult days, often when his wife was away visiting family. Liza, ever the listener, offered quiet comfort. She never imagined those conversations would blur the lines of service and emotion. Still, there were signs of loneliness. After years abroad, her marriage back home had faded. Her husband rarely wrote, and when he did, it was to ask for money. Her children were grown and independent. Liza began to find purpose in the family she served, especially in Faisal's appreciation. To her friends, she admitted feeling valued for the first time in years. "He respects me," she once said. "He listens when I talk." But in a city bound by cultural walls and invisible hierarchies, that simple connection was already dangerous. What began as trust would slowly turn into dependence, and then into something far more complicated. Beneath her modest uniform and quiet smile, Liza carried a secret longing, to be seen not as a servant, but as a woman, worthy of love, belonging, and peace. It was that longing that would soon lead her down a path she could never return from. It began quietly, almost invisibly, the kind of connection that grows not through words but through moments. Liza had worked for Faisal al-Mansour for nearly 4 years when the dynamic between them began to shift. At first, it was small things, the way he thanked her personally after dinner, or how he'd ask her opinion about his children's meals, something no employer had ever done before. Faisal's marriage by then was beginning to fracture. His wife Amina came from a powerful Emirati family, but their union had become cold, filled with silence and distance. She traveled often, taking the children with her for long stays in Abu Dhabi. When she was gone, the large villa felt empty. Liza became the only constant presence, the one who knew the rhythm of his household, his habits, and eventually his moods. Late at night, when Faisal worked in his study, he would ask Liza to bring him tea. Sometimes they would talk first about work, then about life. He told her about the pressures of his business, how he felt trapped by expectation. She listened quietly with the patience of someone used to carrying others' burdens. One evening, as she placed a cup of tea on his desk, their hands brushed. It meant nothing, she told herself, but something lingered in the air that night, a silence that felt heavier than words. From then on, messages began to appear on Liza's old phone, short, cautious, always at night. "Thank you for listening. You make things calmer. Don't tell anyone I message you." For Liza, those words filled a void years of loneliness had carved inside her. She had not heard kind words from a man in over a decade. To her, Faisal's attention felt like validation, proof that she was more than just the help. To Faisal, it was something else, comfort without consequence. A relationship that existed behind closed doors, invisible to a society that would condemn it. Their meetings became more frequent, more secretive. He began asking her to accompany him to his private apartment near Dara, officially to clean and organize, but everyone who worked for him suspected otherwise. Liza's friends noticed changes. She wore perfume, styled her hair differently, even smiled more. When asked, she dismissed it with a laugh. "He just treats me well," she'd say, but there was a tremor in her voice that betrayed her heart. For months, they lived in that fragile balance, a secret built on illusion. Liza began to dream. Faisal told her things she wanted to believe, that his marriage was over, that he planned to start fresh, that he would take care of her. "You'll never have to work again," he promised in one late-night message later retrieved by investigators. But reality in Dubai was different. Such a relationship wasn't only forbidden by culture, it was criminal under local law. For a domestic worker, discovery could mean deportation or imprisonment. Liza knew this, but the heart often refuses what the mind understands. Still, cracks began to form. Faisal grew paranoid. He warned her never to message him during the day, never to keep photos. "If anyone finds out," he said, "we'll both lose everything." She obeyed. Love for her meant loyalty. For him, it meant control. When Amina, his wife, returned unexpectedly one weekend, Liza was dismissed from her duties for vacation. For 2 weeks she heard nothing. Then, late one night, a message. "Come to the apartment, we need to talk." She went hopeful that it was reconciliation. But from that night on, something between them changed. The affection was gone, in its place tension and fear. Neighbors would later tell police they'd often heard raised voices from the flat. No one reported it, not in a city where silence is safer than truth. The affair no one spoke about had become the secret everyone sensed. And though neither Liza nor Faisal could see it yet, that secret was already beginning to destroy them both. In the months that followed, Liza Ramos began to build her own quiet fantasy, a life beyond servitude, beyond loneliness. For the first time in years, she believed she had found something like love. Faisal's words fed that belief. He told her she was different, that she had a pure heart, that she understood him in ways his wife never could. He said he wanted to start over, to buy her a small apartment, maybe even a business someday. Those promises became her hope. She began saving money, withdrawing less to send home, tucking away a small envelope of cash in her suitcase. In her calls to her eldest daughter, Marissa, she spoke vaguely of changes coming soon, saying she might stop working soon and finally rest. Her friends noticed the shift too. Gemma, her closest confidant, tried to reason with her. "He's your employer, Liza. You're walking on fire." But Liza only smiled. "You don't understand. He's kind. He said he loves me." For Liza, love meant trust. For Faisal, love meant secrecy. Their relationship existed in the shadows, stolen moments, late-night messages, untraceable calls. But the higher the secrecy climbed, the heavier it weighed on both of them. At work, whispers began. Other house staff noticed changes. Faisal's temper, his absences, his strange protectiveness toward Liza. The walls of privilege in Dubai are built on silence, but even silence has cracks. Word reached Amina, Faisal's wife. She had suspected infidelity before, but when she noticed unfamiliar perfume on her husband's shirt and overheard a heated phone call in Tagalog, her suspicions hardened. She confronted Faisal one evening. Witnesses said shouting erupted from the family villa, furniture overturned, glass shattering, children crying. Liza, frightened, stayed out of sight. Days later, Amina filed a quiet complaint through her family connections, not of adultery, but of inappropriate behavior between Faisal and a domestic worker. In the UAE, such an allegation could devastate reputations. Faisal was summoned for questioning by his company's board, forced to take temporary leave while matters were reviewed. For the first time, his perfect image began to crumble. His business partners distanced themselves, his social circle whispered. To a man like Faisal, humiliation was worse than guilt. He turned his frustration toward Liza. His messages grew colder, sharper. "Don't call me, stay away from the house. You've caused enough trouble." Liza was devastated. She begged for forgiveness, insisting she hadn't spoken to anyone. "You said we were together," she wrote. "You said we had a future." But Faisal stopped replying. Days passed with silence. The woman who once felt chosen now felt discarded. She spent her free hours staring at her phone, waiting for his name to appear on the screen. Gemma later recalled, "She started losing weight. She said she couldn't sleep. She said maybe God was punishing her." Still, when Faisal finally reached out again, late one evening, she answered. His message was simple. "Come to the apartment, we need to talk." She believed it was reconciliation. But those who knew Faisal said he had grown desperate. Rumors of internal inquiries at his company, whispers of divorce, financial audits, everything pointed to a man cornered by his own lies. Liza went to the apartment the next morning, carrying a small gift, a shirt she had bought him with her savings. No one knows exactly what was said in that room, but neighbors would later recall hearing raised voices, a woman crying, and the sound of something heavy falling. By then, the love she thought would free her had already begun to destroy her. And in the space between devotion and denial, Liza Ramos lost the one thing she had always clung to, her faith that love could save her. The final week of Maria Liza Ramos's life was a series of quiet warnings no one understood until it was too late. By the time February arrived, her relationship with Faisal Al-Mansour had soured into tension and mistrust. Friends noticed her unease. She stopped smiling at work, avoided gatherings, and seemed constantly distracted by her phone. Gemma, her closest friend, later said, She was afraid to talk in public. She said someone was watching her. CCTV footage recovered by Dubai police would later piece together her final movements. On a Wednesday evening at 7:42 p.m., Liza entered Faisal's private apartment in Al Nada. She carried a grocery bag, a small suitcase, and a neatly wrapped gift, the shirt she'd bought him weeks earlier. The cameras showed her glancing behind her before entering, as if making sure no one followed. At 8:10 p.m., Faisal arrived. He parked his Lexus in the underground garage, rode the lift alone, and entered the apartment with his keycard. Moments later, the hallway camera caught faint shadows moving past the closed door, the silhouettes of two people in confrontation. Neighbors later told police they heard a woman shouting in English and a man responding sharply in Arabic. No one called security. Liza's phone activity that night paints a chilling picture. Between 9:00 p.m. and midnight, she exchanged multiple messages with Gemma. 9:05 p.m. He's angry again. I think it's about his wife. 9:22 p.m. He says I ruined his life. 9:50 p.m. I'll go home tomorrow. I just want this to end. At 10:03 p.m. she sent a final message. Don't worry, he said we'll talk properly in the morning. After that, there were no more replies. The next morning, CCTV showed Faisal leaving the building at 8:16 a.m., wearing sunglasses and carrying a small duffel bag. He locked the door and did not return. He made no calls to Liza that day, nor the next. When Gemma couldn't reach her friend, she assumed Liza had decided to leave work for good. But by the second day, unease turned into dread. Her phone was ringing, Gemma told investigators, but no one was answering. Liza never ignored calls. That Friday afternoon, neighbors complained of a strong odor coming from the apartment. A maintenance worker was sent to check the source. When he entered using the building's master key, the smell hit him immediately. Inside, the air was thick with silence, and the sight that awaited him was unforgettable. Liza lay face down on the kitchen floor, her head near the base of a marble counter, one arm twisted beneath her. There were bruises on her wrists and a small gash above her temple. Nearby, broken glass sparkled across the tile, remnants of a shattered wine bottle. Her phone was on the counter, screen cracked, showing missed calls and unread messages. Police arrived within minutes. They photographed every inch of the apartment, collected fingerprints, and seized both phones. There was no sign of forced entry or robbery. Nothing of value had been taken except her life. The forensic report was blunt. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head resulting from a violent fall. Contributing factors, signs of manual strangulation, bruising consistent with defensive struggle. Estimated time of death, between 10:30 p.m. and 12:00 a.m. Wednesday night. The investigators believed there had been an argument that turned physical. Perhaps she tried to leave. Perhaps she threatened to expose him. Whatever was said, it ended with a single blow that sent her crashing into the counter's edge. When the news reached her friends, disbelief turned into grief. "We warned her," Gemma whispered, "but she loved him more than she feared him." As Dubai's sun set that evening, police sealed the apartment. The city outside carried on, traffic humming, lights flickering across glass towers, unaware that another invisible woman's story had ended behind closed doors. 2 days later, authorities detained Faisal al-Mansour at the airport as he attempted to board a flight to Qatar. In his luggage, they found Liza's passport and an envelope with 14,000 dirhams, the exact amount of her unpaid salary. The secret love that once promised escape had become the evidence that sealed her fate. And in that quiet kitchen, surrounded by the life she had cleaned and cared for, Maria Liza Ramos met her end, alone, unseen, and unheard. The Dubai police investigation into Maria Liza Ramos's death began within hours of the discovery. The crime scene was methodically documented, photographs, fingerprints, every trace preserved. But to the officers who first arrived, something immediately stood out. The apartment showed signs of a struggle, yet nothing had been stolen. The bruises on Liza's wrists and neck told their own story, one far more intimate than a break-in. Detectives from the Criminal Investigation Department, CID, began tracing her final 48 hours. CCTV footage confirmed that only 2 people had entered the apartment during that time, Liza and Faisal Al-Mansour. There was no evidence of any third party. Investigators also noted that Faisal's Lexus, seen leaving the garage early the next morning, was never recorded returning. To them, it was already clear who their prime suspect was. But Dubai's justice system moves carefully, especially when an Emirati citizen is involved. Faisal was initially contacted for questioning as a witness. He told police that Liza had come to discuss a personal issue, that she was emotional, and that he left her safe and alive that night. He denied any physical altercation. "She was upset," he said calmly. "She fell, I didn't touch her." However, the forensic evidence contradicted him. The autopsy revealed signs of strangulation, defensive wounds on her hands, and a head injury inconsistent with an accidental fall. The pattern of bruises matched fingers pressing around her throat. Digital forensics would later expose what truly happened. Though Liza's phone appeared to have multiple deleted messages, investigators retrieved backups from the cloud. They uncovered a disturbing timeline of arguments, messages showing her pleading for honesty and warning him she might tell the truth. In one of the final exchanges, sent hours before her death, Liza wrote, "You used me, I have nothing left." To which Faisal replied, "You promised silence, you talk too much, this ends now." Those words became a cornerstone of the case. Police tracked Faisal's movements through phone triangulation. He had spent the night at the apartment, then left early the next morning, driving directly to his office and later to a travel agency. 48 hours later, he was arrested at Dubai International Airport, minutes before boarding a flight to Qatar. In his luggage were 2 telling items, Liza's passport and an envelope containing 14,000 dirhams, the exact amount she was owed in unpaid salary. During interrogation, Faisal maintained his innocence. He claimed Liza had fallen during an argument and hit her head. When pressed about the bruises, he said she had grabbed his arm in distress. He denied any romantic relationship, calling her a good worker who became emotional. But investigators were unconvinced. The evidence told a story of anger and panic, not compassion. The Philippine embassy soon became involved. A representative described the case as deeply troubling, not only because of Liza's death, but because of how common such stories had become. "Our women go abroad seeking hope," one official said. "Too often they return in caskets." Liza's co-workers were interviewed, providing emotional testimony. Gemma broke down describing their final phone call. "She told me he was angry. She said he blamed her for everything. I told her to leave, but she said she still loved him." Despite public silence in local media, word of the case spread rapidly through the Filipino community. Vigils were held in small apartments across Dubai, candles lit under her photo printed from social media. For them, Liza wasn't just another worker. She was every woman who had ever trusted too deeply in a world that offered her no protection. As the evidence piled up, prosecutors charged Faisal with manslaughter, avoiding the harsher murder label, a decision that outraged advocates but reflected the system's bias toward leniency for citizens. For the investigators who handled the case, there was little doubt about what had happened. The story was written in every bruise, every deleted message, every unanswered call. Maria Liza Ramos had loved, trusted, and finally defied the man who controlled her life. And for that, she paid the ultimate price. The trial of Faisal Al-Mansour began quietly in a small chamber of the Dubai Criminal Court. There were no headlines, no cameras, and no reporters allowed inside. For many, it was as if the death of Maria Liza Ramos had never happened at all. Proceedings were held under the veil of privacy due to the sensitive nature of the case. An Emirati citizen accused of killing a foreign domestic worker with whom he had an illicit relationship. The courtroom, lined with polished wood and silence, became the stage where truth was weighed against privilege. The prosecution's case was clear and meticulously built. They presented the forensic report showing blunt force trauma, marks of strangulation, and bruising consistent with a violent struggle. They read out the recovered text messages, including Faisal's chilling final words. "You talk too much. This ends now." They argued that Liza's death was no accident, but the result of rage and control. The defense, however, painted a different picture. Faisal's lawyer described him as a respected businessman and claimed Liza had become emotionally unstable. They argued that she had attacked him during an argument, slipped, and fatally hit her head on the counter. They emphasized his cooperation with police, the absence of premeditation, and his remorse. In many countries, such a defense might have faltered. But in Dubai, where image and hierarchy often blur the lines of justice, it gained traction. Behind closed doors, quiet negotiations began not just between lawyers, but between families, embassies, and local officials. Representatives from the Philippine embassy were allowed to attend portions of the proceedings. They described the experience as disheartening, with limited transparency and restricted access to evidence. "It felt like the verdict had already been decided," one observer said. After 6 months of hearings, the court issued its ruling. Faisal al-Mansour was found guilty of manslaughter, not murder. The judge cited lack of intent and momentary anger as mitigating factors. His sentence, 12 years in prison, was seen by many as lenient. Some whispered it would be reduced further for good behavior. Liza's family, notified through official channels, received a brief statement. "Justice has been served according to UAE law." They were later informed that compensation would be provided through a private settlement. The amount, a fraction of what Liza had earned in her years of service, was sent through intermediaries. In Dubai, the case vanished from public discourse almost immediately. Local newspapers never named Faisal, referring to him only as a businessman convicted of causing the death of a domestic worker. Within days, the story was buried under lighter headlines. But among the Filipino community, anger quietly simmered. Small vigils were held at churches and worker hostels. Candles flickered beneath her printed photo, and whispers of injustice echoed. 12 years for her life. To the world, it was another resolved case. To those who loved her, it was a reminder that justice, like power, was never equal. And so, while the city moved on, Maria Liza Ramos became another shadow in its glittering skyline, silenced twice. Once by violence, and again by the system meant to defend her. When the call came from the Philippine embassy, Liza's daughter Marissa thought it was a mistake. Her mother had just called days earlier, sounding tired but hopeful, saying she'd be home soon. Instead, the voice on the other end said the words no child ever expects to hear. "We regret to inform you, your mother has passed away." No details, no explanation, only that her body would be repatriated within 2 weeks. In their small house in Laguna, silence hung heavier than grief. Neighbors gathered to console them, but the family could not understand what had happened. Rumors spread faster than facts that Liza had been killed, that it involved her employer, that something shameful had happened. 2 weeks later, the coffin arrived. It was sealed per embassy regulations. The family was not allowed to open it. "We wanted to see her face one last time," Marissa said, "but they said it wasn't allowed." The children wept around the closed casket, whispering apologies, prayers, and questions that would never be answered. A brief statement from the embassy followed. The case had been resolved under UAE law. A small financial settlement was offered, money sent from Faisal's representatives, to support the family. It came with an unspoken condition: silence. Liza's husband, long estranged, accepted it quietly, but her daughters refused to see it as justice. "They paid us to forget her," Marissa told a local reporter. "How can we forget our mother?" Days later, the community held a small vigil outside their church. Candles flickered beneath her framed photograph, the same picture she had sent them years ago, smiling in her uniform. The priest spoke softly about sacrifice, about the countless Filipinos who leave their families behind to serve strangers abroad. They build other people's dreams, he said, while their own dreams fade away. Marissa stood silently in the crowd, clutching her mother's last letter, one that ended with the words, "Don't worry, Anak, I'll come home soon." She did come home, but not the way anyone had imagined. For her family, grief turned into quiet rage, not just for what was taken from them, but for the way the world seemed to move on without ever saying her name. Maria Liza Ramos was gone, and with her went the promise of a mother who had only ever wanted a better life. The death of Maria Liza Ramos was not an isolated tragedy. It was part of a much larger hidden crisis. Every year, thousands of overseas Filipino workers, OFWs, leave their homes to work abroad, many of them women seeking stability, security, and dignity. What they often find instead is isolation, emotional manipulation, and silent suffering behind closed doors. Liza's story mirrors that of countless others, women who cross oceans to serve families that will never call them their own. In the Philippines, they are celebrated as modern-day heroes. But overseas, they become invisible, their lives confined within walls, their identities reduced to job titles: housekeeper, nanny, caregiver. According to the Philippine Department of Migrant Workers, more than 1.8 million Filipinos are employed in the Middle East, with women making up nearly 60% of domestic labor. Many endure overwork, emotional neglect, and in some cases, exploitation that extends beyond labor into their bodies and their private lives. Sociologists describe it as emotional displacement, the slow erosion of self-worth that comes from serving others while being far from those who love you. Over time, loneliness creates dangerous vulnerabilities. "They are starved for connection," said one overseas welfare advocate. "So when someone shows them affection, even a small kindness, it feels like salvation." That longing often leads to tragic entanglements, especially in societies where relationships between domestic workers and employers are taboo. For women like Liza, the boundaries between care, loyalty, and love blur. And when power imbalances exist, one party with wealth, citizenship, and control, the other with dependency and fear, the results can be devastating. Nonprofit organizations have quietly documented dozens of similar cases. Filipinas found dead in apartments, reports labeled accidental or unexplained. Each story ends the same way: silence. Legal systems abroad, bound by cultural sensitivities, often classify such deaths as domestic disputes rather than crimes of coercion or abuse. Within the Filipino community, these losses leave deep scars. Migrant groups hold vigils, share warnings, and post memorials online. Each new case reignites an old pain. "It's always the same story," said one OFW counselor in Dubai. "She loved, she trusted, she died alone." The tragedy of Liza Ramos exposes not only a personal betrayal but a systemic indifference. The world's reliance on migrant women whose lives are expendable once their labor ends. Their sacrifices fuel economies, yet their suffering remains undocumented. They are both the backbone and the shadow of globalization. For those who knew her, Liza's death became a quiet symbol. In life, she cleaned the messes of others. In death, she revealed the mess hidden beneath society's perfection. The truth that behind luxury and order often lie the invisible wounds of those who keep it running. Liza's story asks a haunting question. How many more women must die in silence before the world admits that their lives matter just as much as those they serve? Her case was closed, but the crisis she represents, the loneliness, exploitation, and powerlessness of migrant women, remains painfully open. In the months that followed the trial, Dubai moved on. The apartment where Maria Liza Ramos had taken her last breath was quietly renovated, its walls repainted, its history erased. New tenants moved in, unaware of the woman whose final moments had unfolded there. Even Faisal's name faded from conversation, his business associates moved on, his family relocated, his sentence serving as both punishment and protection. But for those who loved Liza, time did not heal, it only hollowed. Her friends in Dubai gathered in secret to hold a memorial mass. They lit candles in cramped dormitories, their prayers whispered in Tagalog beneath the hum of air conditioners. On social media, photos of Liza in her crisp uniform were shared with the caption, "You are gone but not forgotten." The Filipino community abroad took her story as both tragedy and warning. "We are all Liza," one OFW advocate wrote. "We leave to give our families life, but sometimes we give up our own." Her name began to circulate in migrant support groups as a symbol, a reminder of the cost of silence and the dangers hidden within trust. Back home in Laguna, Liza's daughter Marissa refused to let her mother's memory fade into another statistic. Using the small compensation money, she opened a small eatery, a dream her mother had once spoken about. On its wall hung a framed photo of Liza smiling in her work uniform, beneath it a handwritten sign, "For Mama, who gave everything." Customers came not just for food, but to hear her story, to be reminded of the quiet strength of women like her. For Marissa, the eatery was more than survival. It was her mother's legacy made tangible, a space where grief turned into dignity. Each year on the anniversary of Liza's death, her family and friends gather to pray. There are no headlines, no public recognition, just candles, stories, and silence. Yet in that silence, her memory endures. The world may have forgotten Maria Liza Ramos, but among those she left behind, she remains a symbol of endurance, a testament to the countless invisible women whose love built lives far beyond their own. In the end, her legacy is not tragedy, but resilience. A mother, a worker, a dreamer, remembered not for how she died, but for how fiercely she lived. In a city that worships wealth and silence, Maria Liza Ramos became both invisible and unforgettable. Her life began with a promise to give her family a better future, and ended in the home of the man who had promised her love. Between those two promises lies the truth of countless women like her, valued for their labor, ignored in their suffering, and mourned only in whispers. Liza's story is not just about one affair or one act of violence. It is about power, who holds it, who loses it, and who pays for it. In a world where class and citizenship divide worth, her death was more than a tragedy. It was a mirror. It reflected how easily compassion turns to control, and how love, when bound by power, can become a weapon. For a few days, her name passed through embassy halls, police files, and courtrooms. Then it vanished, replaced by new headlines, new tragedies. But in the hearts of those who knew her, she became something eternal, a reminder of every migrant woman who gave her life for others and died unseen. If there is any justice left, it lives not in the courtroom that sentenced her killer, but in the memory of those who speak her name. Liza Ramos was not just a victim. She was proof that silence protects the powerful and destroys the powerless. And so her story ends not with vengeance, but with a haunting question. How many more must fall before the world listens? As the lights of Dubai glitter against the night, somewhere in the shadows still echoes her final truth. She wanted to be loved. She wanted to be seen. And for that, she lost everything,